Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer. I'm not out and about today. I'm answering an email inquiry. In fact, I get quite a few emails actually from people who say, is your background in the entertainment industry? Were you an actor, or have you been a filmmaker or a television producer or something like that? People are often very interested, and it's very flattering when people do get in touch and ask me such questions. And I thought, well, it would be quite nice to perhaps tell a little bit of my story, as it's my heritage, but also it might encourage others to tell their stories, because we all have a unique individual story. We have memories of our childhood, our memories of growing up, and with the amount of changes that are going on in this world, I do think that it's probably a good idea to try and tell our stories. In the old days, people used to write them down, and you've got these books of memories from a Yorkshire village or memories from a Sussex village or whatever it might be. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I think because the modern way now is with mobile phones or DSLR cameras or whatever, GoPro cameras, to record things and put them up on social media, this is clearly the way that people perhaps can express themselves more easily. So I thought I would just do a little bit of my story. It's probably going to be in episodes, perhaps once a week, that sort of thing. If nobody's interested, I will stop. It's as simple as that. So about me, well, I'm Richard Vobes, and I was born in Liss in 1963. Do I really want to tell people how old I am? Well, you know, it's easy enough to look up. I have a Wikipedia page apparently, so you can see. Liss is in Hampshire. Now, I've actually made a video about looking for the cottage hospital that I was born in, and it was only a couple of years ago that I went there for the very first time after 50 something odd years to have a look to see if the cottage hospital that my mother was driven to when her waters broke and that I was then delivered in was still there. And it still is, but it has changed from what it has been, and I think it's in the process of changing, and it may even be up for sale. I can't remember now. There's, you know, nothing stands still in this world. At the time, we lived as a family in a place called Cowplain, which is also in Hampshire. So I was born as a Hampshire boy, but very soon, I don't really remember a great deal about Hampshire, or indeed living in Cowplain at all. There is this one memory, and you know how memories can be deceptive. It might be that there was a photograph that has etched this as a memory, but I do remember running to a stile, a country stile, to meet my dad when he came back from work, and I must have been about 3, something like that, 2 or 3 probably, as a toddler. And I remember that my mother would take my sister and I don't really remember my sister at the time, but she must have been, she's 18 months younger than me, to this stile, and we would wait, and my father would be walking back from his work across a field. Now, whether that has any significance whatsoever to me enjoying going for country walks, I don't know. But I have to say that image, whether it be a photograph that stuck in my mind or a real image of me waiting at this stile, it always gives me a thrill whenever I clamber over a stile. Isn't that weird? And until I was filming this or getting ready to film this today, I hadn't given that the slightest bit of thought. But actually, you know, it is funny how things in our childhood really make a huge influence on us in our adult life. So that was at Cowplain, and as I said, I don't really remember much about that. My mother used to tell us some things about the things we got up to, but I don't recall those really. My next memory is moving to Horsham, and I lived in Horsham in a road called Hillside, and I was about 4 or 5 when we moved to Hillside, and it was a modernish house. And by modern, I say it's a sort of 1960s house, so it was really quite modern, seeing as I was born in 63. And so it was a new house, but I don't know that we weren't the first in there. So somebody must have been in there for about 5 years, and then we moved in there or something like that. Anyway, my first recollection from there, and it must have been pretty early on, is, and it's a stupid one, is the front door slamming on my finger, and I was in absolute agony and pain. And those memories where you have a bit of pain, they stick with you, don't they? They really do. So I remember that. And the second memory, early memory at the house in Hillside, was playing, running around, came hurtling down the stairs when I must have been, again, 5 or 6, and we had a coffee table, an oblong shaped coffee table with sharp corners. And yeah, you've already guessed it, I tripped as I ran through into the lounge, tripped, and I have still, I think it's still there, I haven't looked for it, but there's a scar right between the bridge of my nose. And I went in there and there was profuse amounts of blood apparently, and I was rushed off to hospital and had a couple of stitches put in. I don't remember the hospital bit of it. I remember the running into the table, and I remember the reaction of feeling, oh my God, you know, I thought I was going to die, that sort of thing, because there was a lot of blood coming out. And as a kid, you know, you're thinking these weird things. And it was just very painful. So they're my first few memories as a kid. At where I lived. So it's interesting that they etch on themselves so much. Well, I grew up and I went to a primary school which was called Aranside Primary School, and it's still there, it's still in existence. And I do vaguely remember my first days at school. People say they remember their first days at school, and I sort of remember that first day of going in. I certainly remember the infant side of the school, and then the junior side of the school, and the sand pits and the way it was laid out. And I think as an infant I was okay. I enjoyed it, playing in the sand pits, and you have all those sort of memories. But as you get a bit older, and I was in the juniors side of the school, I felt very much a loner. And in fact, all my school life, I felt very much a loner. Didn't really get on. Kids wanted to play football and all those sort of things. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to play imaginary games, sort of acting games. And I don't think kids were that interested in that in the school that I was in. And I did feel that I was set apart from them. Now, it's interesting because when I get into my secondary school, secondary education, I'm afraid I am one of those boys that went to a comprehensive school in the 1970s, comprehensive education, CSEs. GCSEs hadn't been invented. It was just certificates of secondary education. That was it. But I haven't got there yet. But when I was there, again, I felt even more out of place. And I think that sense of being a loner and being out of place has been with me all my life. And in a way, I think I've got that a little bit from both of my parents. My parents at one point seemed to have friends, because they would have these parties that we weren't allowed to attend. I think we were allowed at the very beginning of a party that they would have at the house to say hello to people, and then we were sent up to bed. And of course you can't go to sleep as kids when there's music going along, and they would have these very strange games that people would run around the garden looking for clues for things. It was a great game, and we would play it as kids the following day, because some of the clues were left around in the garden. A very odd situation. And we so we would play that, but we would listen, because we couldn't go to sleep at night, so we would listen to the party, but we were never allowed down. But as I got older, I became more aware that they actually had less of these parties, fewer of them, and my parents didn't really. They had a couple of friends, but they seemed very much also, now I reflect on it, and I've lost both my parents. I'm sure they'll turn up somewhere. No, I have. They're all, gone to the next beyond, whatever that is, if it is. But they seem like loners. So I feel that I've had that being alone thing pretty much all of my life, and so that's sort of acted with me quite a bit. So, but the one thing that when I was at junior school, the one other redeeming memory that comes back to me is puppet shows. We must have got into some papier-mâché puppet making, and these were like, finger puppets that you'd have a head on them, and you'd dress them up and you'd do puppet shows. We must have done something like that, because that was, I think, the germ of the theatrical nature of my life. We would make these puppets, and my friend Peter Richardson and I would spend lots of time in the corridor working out puppet shows, and the puppet shows had no set. We were just hidden behind a board, and we would put the puppets up and improvise a hell of a lot, really. We would pretend to be working out we may well have been working out the storyline, but when it came to it, in the end, as we must have been about 8 or 9 at this time, they just became a little bit improvised chaos. And that was the early part of, I think, me. Several things in that early thing which I hadn't really thought about is, one, interested in the countryside but not really knowing why, and we'll find out more about that when I talk about where I lived in the countryside about me. The second being very much happy and more content on my own, which has always been a theme in my life, and then the theatrical element. And isn't it strange that in those first years of your life, it's so important when you're bringing up children, I think, that you nurture them in a way for positive things, because the things they pick up on in those early years, I strongly believe, will be with them for the rest of their life, particularly as they get into maturity. Anyway, I don't want to babble on for ages, so if you're interested to hear the second part of my story, then do let me know in the comments. That would be good. Give me a thumbs up and all the usual, become a patron and blah blah blah. But also think about recording your story, because your kids or grandchildren or friends of family or future generations, I think, would be very interested. We've all got fascinating stories, and it is very, very much worth recording. Till next time, thanks for watching. Bye bye.